Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
The Murdershelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
For 6 months, she had clung to life. She had endured 15 surgeries, had become emaciated, her body able to cope with only small amounts of intravenous feeding. She battled brain damage, insurmountable pain, deadly infection, and repeated bouts of meningitis. There had been numerous scares when they thought they'd lost her, and just as often, she fought back. She was making such progress, she didn't need constant supervision anymore. Although she was still in a coma unit, barring any unforeseen setbacks, the next step was a move to a rehabilitation facility. From While She Slept by Marion Collins. Welcome to the Murdershelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is episode 160, Bitter Almonds, part 2 on While She Slept by Marion Collins. Please be sure to listen to part 1, episode 159, before this one, because it makes more sense when you start at the beginning. And now context is crucial. Right, in part 1, beautiful, vibrant Jill Russell, and Ivy League graduate Jeff Cahill, with a large Catholic family, are madly in love and marry, having 2 children, Tim and Mary. But financial and personal strains erode their marriage. With a custody agreement in place, Jill has fallen in love with Tom Tulloch and is on the edge of moving out when a horrifying assault occurs. Jeff bashes in Jill's head in their family home, with the children witnessing. Jill was in horrific shape at the hospital, while Jeff is giving a statement to the Oronogo Sheriff Department and the New York State Police. But before we begin, I want to thank you for your amazing response to this book. We are off the charts. Thank you for the support, because without you, this is just no fun. Now, also, there are a few events, and I'm thrilled to announce that I will be attending an important fundraising event this weekend, April 10th and 11th, 2026, and hanging out with some incredible people. Nicole and Jemmy and Maria Q from the Mother Knows Death podcast, True Crime with the Sarges, Joe Jockalone, and retired FBI agent Scott Duffy, right near Philadelphia in Horsham, PA. All proceeds go directly to support the Center for Forensic Science Research and Education's transformative summer program, the Forensic Science Mentoring Institute, which has enriched the lives of high school students for over 25 years. This is an amazing opportunity to dive into the world of forensics in a real laboratory alongside experienced scientists. So be sure to grab your tickets at action.cfsre.org, A Mother Knows Death. Don't miss this, and I hope I will see you there. Also, mark your calendars for the Hampton Whodunit event from April 16th to 19th, 2026. This promises to be an invaluable experience packed with fun, insightful knowledge, and some fangirling. And don't forget the wine. You will not want to miss this. And then coming up fast right around the corner is Crimecon 2026 in Las Vegas, happening May 29th to 31st at Caesars Palace. I am excited to return to Creators Row and reconnect with everyone. My Crimecon meetup will take place on Thursday, May 28th, right after the Crimecon kickoff party. We will gather at 10 p.m. local time at the lobby bar, right across from the registration desk at Caesars. So stop by, say hello, meet my wonderful assistant, Michelle, and you are going to love her. And with all this going on, do you need some merch? All right, check out Jan at www.justaskjan.com, where you can find my merch along with other offerings from Zone 7 with Cheryl McCollum, True Crime with the Sarge, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, and a host of other fantastic clients. And don't forget to join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month. You can suggest cases and books I'll feature, talk true crime, and I am doing my serial killer case studies. Right, all of these links are on my blog, and I know it's a lot, but there's just so much going on this spring, and I'm ready. I am really ready. So when we left off, Jill Cahill was struggling for her life at University Hospital in Syracuse. Estranged husband, Jeff Cahill, is taken to the local community hospital and receives a few stitches for a cut on his hand. He was read his Miranda rights and was arrested. At the police station, Jeff confesses while giving a formal statement to senior investigator Maynard Cosnett and investigator David Longo. Now, this is taken from his official statement, which I am going to condense a bit. All right, my wife, quote, was unhappy with the marriage. Part of the problem seemed to be possibly infidelity on her part. Over the past month, Jill had awakened me maybe 3 times at night, grabbing my face and turning it towards her and screaming at me. She also grabbed a twine necklace, pulling it, and caused a rope burn on my neck. She also scratched my face. I discussed with my parents, and they advised that I should get up and get away from her. I also showed them the rope burns and the scratches. She was asleep, or appeared to be. Around 4 or 4:15 a.m., I was awakened by Jill. She grabbed my face and wrenched me over, and then grabbed my arms and held me down. She was saying words to the effect that she no longer had a life here. I got up and I went downstairs. She followed me down and was yelling at me. Our daughter Mary came to the top of the stairs, and Jill brought her down. She then took Mary upstairs and put her to bed in our bed and came back down. I went into the kitchen, and Jill came into the kitchen, and the argument continued. Jill picked up a knife, maybe a 6 or 7 inch tapered blade, so think 15 to 17 centimeters. On March 30th, 1998, Jill had taken a knife and held it to her own chest. She also took some kind of pills. I thought she was going to do something like that again, threaten suicide. The knife wasn't sharp, but it had a point, and I tried to take the knife away from her. She struck me, cutting my forearm. I got a hold of her, in a position with her facing away from me and my arms around her, and I forced her out the back door of the house into the mudroom. As we were going out, she was calling to the children, "Call the police, your father's trying to kill me." I pushed her on the floor and we wrestled a bit, and she continued to call the children. I pushed up and turned to get away. She was on the floor face down. I saw several baseball bats and I grabbed one. I turned to face her again, and she was getting up, facing me with her hands about chest high. She still had the knife in her right hand. I swung the bat, hitting her on the left side of her head. As I swung, she raised her hands alongside her head. She started moving backwards, and I swung again. This time she went backwards, falling out the back door onto the concrete patio. I went into the house. My daughter Mary was just inside the back door, and I told her to go upstairs. Jill was calling to Mary, telling her to call the police. "Your father's trying to kill me." Mary ran up the stairs, and Jill came into the house. I could see she was hurt. There was blood on her left shoulder and the side of her head. I still had the baseball bat in my hands, and I swung again, hitting her on the shoulder. This blow deflected, also hitting her on the head. I swung 2 or 3 more times, and she went down to the floor. Then I tried to hold her down. She scratched at me, scratching my back and grabbed me by the balls. Jill called for Tim to call the police. Tim went upstairs. Jill passed out or lost consciousness. She was moaning. And then I called my dad, and I told him Jill had come at me with a knife, that I hit her, and she was really badly hurt. End quote. Well, let's briefly examine what Jeff said. He claims that Jill was possibly unfaithful and that she threatened him. He said that she held him down by grabbing his arms. Now, I absolutely believe that women can be aggressive, but we also know that Jill is rather petite, small enough that she couldn't risk another pregnancy. So she is under 5 feet or 1.5 meters tall. Did she really manage to hold him down? From Jeff's mugshot, he is 5 foot 8 feet tall. So I find it hard to believe that she wrestled him. Did she grab a knife? It's certainly possible, though she would have been acting in self-defense. However, considering Jeff's erratic behavior, reported by others, not Jill, I remain somewhat skeptical. Once he struck her with the bat, he said she moved back, not toward him. Yet still, he struck her 2 or 3 more times. She fell backward to the ground, and he struck her again. Now, given he hits her while she's lying on the floor, and again when she stands up, yelling for the kids to call the police, it is evident the situation is severe and spiraling. I believe she did say that to the kids, as Jill repeatedly had said that Jeff would never hurt her because he loves the kids too much. These statements were her attempt to diffuse the situation, to appeal to Jeff's love for the kids, and that he could not hurt her without hurting them. However, Jeff is not the man Jill believes him to be, and I will address this further as we continue. But let me know what you heard in his statement. His mother, Patty, and brother Kevin Cahill arrived, and his dad, Jim Cahill, brought a friend, Dr. Kelly. Now, Jeff still hadn't called an ambulance, and I have to wonder why, and what he was doing while he was waiting for his family to arrive. When Jill was found, she had towels placed around her head and was clearly not doing well. But from family statements, Jeff went and reassured the kids that he had been cut a few times, but their dad was okay. Kevin Cahill was asked why he didn't call 911 when he came there and found Jill on the floor. He said he opted to contact FISH, Friends in Service Here, a local community organization where his mother volunteered, and asked them for an ambulance. But FISH wasn't connected to the 911 system, so the response was slower. And he claimed that Jill was awake at the time, saying, quote, "Jeff, how did we let this happen? Just clean me up and don't tell anyone," end quote. And I call BS on this. This woman was calling on her children to call 911 and to save her from their father. So BS, don't believe you, Kevin. The police visited Tom Tulick, who was completely devastated. He shared that he had been in love with Jill for 20 years, ever since she was married to first husband Greg Owens. Tom and Jill had had a lunch date and planned to move her into her new place the following weekend, and they intended to get married once her divorce was finalized. Meanwhile, in the hospital waiting room, Jill's former fiancé, Sal Piemonte, arrived. You might remember he was the youngest DA in Syracuse at one point. Sal offered his assistance as Jill's family would navigate the many legal challenges they now faced. And Jeff was headed for a bail hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. on Tuesday, and they should all be present, including Jill's divorce attorney, Anthony DiCaprio. Utterly exhausted, Jill's mother and father, Joan and Fred Russell, Debbie, her sister, and her husband, Bill, checked into the Sheridan University Hotel 2 blocks away. And this was just the grueling beginning for Jill and her family's journey. After Jeff's confession, he was again read his Miranda rights, and confirmed that he voluntarily agreed to give them a written statement, initialing each page. As Jeff had outlined the sequence of events, Cosnett heard back from the veteran investigators at the crime scene. As Trooper Hoffman suspected, Jeff's claim of what happened did not match the physical scene. The wounds allegedly inflicted by Jill in a frenzied state more resembled those that were self-inflicted, likely from a nail that was sticking out of the wall in the mudroom at exactly 3 feet 10 inches or 1.2 meters high, matching the location and height of Jeff's scratches. And doubts continued to grow about the accuracy of Jeff's statements. Cosnett told Jeff that what he was saying just didn't jive with what investigators were finding. The scratches did not look like knife wounds, and did Jeff want to amend his statement? Thinking about it, Jeff agreed, and investigator Longo began typing up what Jeff now told him. Quote, "After helping Jill back into the kitchen, he retrieved the knife from outside and placed it on the kitchen floor. Now he hit her with the baseball bat at least twice more." End quote. And signing this new statement, he paused. Correcting himself, Jeff began his third statement. Quote, "While I was arguing with my wife in the kitchen, I got Jill in a bear hug position. Her back was to me, and I got Jill out and down on the floor. I got up, got the baseball bat, and Jill was on her feet with the knife in her hand. I swung the bat twice at her, and I hit Jill on the head. Jill fell back and out the door. At that point, I heard Mary inside, and I yelled to her that everything was going to be okay, to go upstairs. I then thought Jill was badly hurt, and I felt I should help her. I then helped Jill back into the house and into the kitchen. I ran back to the mudroom, and I got the knife she had, and I put it on the floor by the stove. I got some towels from the kitchen area and helped Jill. The argument started up again, and Jill and I were wrestling. That's when she scratched my back. Then I got the bat, and Jill tried to take it away from me, and I hit her in the head with it again. We continued to struggle, and then I struck Jill in the head with the bat. Jill didn't have the knife during this struggle. After hitting her, Jill was just laying there on the floor, breathing very shallow. I went to the basement and I wrapped towels around Jill's head. While I was in the basement, I realized what was going on, and I could not believe this was happening. I cut a piece from the garden hose using the kitchen knife, not the same one. I then set up the hose from the tailpipe of my car to the rear window, and I used duct tape to secure those. When I was in the car, I saw my rosary, and I decided that I couldn't kill myself. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't believe what had happened. I went into the mudroom, and I found the nail. And then I put the scratches on my left shoulder and arm with it, because I wanted to make it look like there was more of a struggle than there was. I was also afraid that Jill was going to die, and this is when I called my father and talked to the children." End quote. After reading it over, Jeff signed it, and this was at 1:06 p.m. Now realize I condensed a lot of that third statement, but I gave you the essence of it. Jeff was led to lockup, and he would stay there that afternoon and night. The next morning, Jill's friend Katie Price drove Debbie and the Russells to the bail hearing, where the district attorney requested $200,000 bail for Jeff's attempted murder charge. His lawyer sought a bail of $25,000. Jill's family, still in shock, listened as Jeff was called a pillar of the community for coaching Tim's baseball and soccer teams. However, Chief Assistant DA Rick Trunfio highlighted Jeff's recent legal issues, and the judge postponed a decision for a week. Meanwhile, Jim and Mark Cahill posted $100,000, and Jeff was released later that night, infuriating DA Trunfio. In New York State, at this time, judges could only consider a defendant's likelihood of returning to court, regardless of the crime's severity. Despite bashing in his wife's skull while she was unarmed on the floor, Jeff was out in less than 24 hours. Meanwhile, Anthony DiCaprio secured an order of protection for Jill, Tim, and Mary, stating that if Jeff approached them, he would face arrest. Fred, Joan, Debbie, and Katie were gathered at Jill's bedside, each having a one-sided conversation. On hearing Katie's voice, Jill moved. Quote, "It was the first real sign of something positive in Jill's condition," end quote, a glimmer of hope. For days, Jill's eyes would be closed and her legs swollen. After her brain swelled, she was placed on a ventilator due to this deep star-shaped incision, which was causing spinal fluid to leak. Later, Fred and Joan picked up their grandchildren, and Tim mentioned that Dad had showed him his cuts. Horrified, they stayed silent, dropping the kids off at the Cahill family home. Patty Cahill looked, but didn't ask about Jill. Debbie now told Patty about the restraining order, and Patty assured them that Jeff would be kept away from his kids. And they left, hoping that the Cahills were handling the situation and caring for their grandkids. At the hospital, Debbie found out that Jeff had called the switchboard asking for Jill, a violation already. Speaking with Jill's doctor, he was concerned about the possibility of meningitis. He performed a simple procedure to drain pressure from Jill's brain, which provided much-needed relief. But sadly, Jill was going to have at least 5 bouts with meningitis over the next 6 months. After the breathing tube was finally removed, Jill still looked like something out of Frankenstein's laboratory. With stitches everywhere, her purple face, red swollen eyes, with multiple tubes everywhere, she was a frightening sight. Tom Tulloch sat behind Jill, reading Chicken Soup for the Soul, while a CD of her favorite music played. He mentioned that his father had spoken with Dr. Kelly, who told him that Jim Cahill had come to his door, claiming the kids had argued, never mentioning the severe beating Jill had received. And some of the pieces began answering some of the questions everyone had. 2 weeks into Jill's induced coma, her family was coming to terms with, quote, the son-in-law they had welcomed into the family with open arms, who had used their beloved Jillie's head for batting practice, inflicting such devastating injuries that she would probably die. And if, by the grace of God, she did survive, the odds were that she would be brain damaged and confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life, end quote. Jeff, out on bail, was living with his brother Tim and his wife, while the Russells were just outraged. Jeff admitted to assaulting Jill, yet here he was walking around free. DA Rick Trumfio now warned them about the potential impact of Jeff's family manipulating the children, leaving them uneasy. Rumors were circulating widely that the Cahills were searching for Tom Tulloch, but Tom ignored this. Meanwhile, Anthony DiCaprio continued to renew the temporary protection order for Jill and the children. That he has to renew it and it's only temporary is truly baffling. Well, Jeff's life had collapsed. He lost the only woman he had loved, who was now with another man, and he couldn't see his beloved children. Jill was close to death, and if she passed away, he would never see his kids again. His business was a disaster, his finances were worse, and his vehicle had been repossessed. His reputation was ruined, bringing shame to his family, who still had not come to see Jill in the hospital. Now, before the Russells could care for Tim and Mary, they needed to secure a place to live. Kathy McDonald, who, if you remember, was going to buy the nursery with Jill and Michelle before Jeff sabotaged the purchase, offered the Russells a guest room on their property that had 2 bedrooms and would be ideal for their needs, and the children would have playmates as well. Accepting, they contacted attorney Greg Monashevsky, The attorney the family court had appointed as the children's guardian and shared their decision. With her respirator out and coming out of the coma, Jill was finally able to speak. She called for her children and she reached for her mother's hand. A week later, she asked, "How you doing?" A huge improvement. Things were looking up. Now, initially, only family and Tom Tulloch could visit. Learning that her kids were still with the Cahills, Jill was adamant, quote, "Get them away from there," end quote. By May 1st, Jill was chatting enthusiastically, recognizing everybody and enjoying watching Seinfeld. But it irked her that she was tied down, as any movement could actually injure her further, and she constantly asked for scissors. Well, the next day, her arm was untied, and she called Michelle, who was amazed by Jill's verbal fluency and thanked God for answering her prayers. Now, a surgery was performed to replace a piece of skull that had been removed and placed in storage, because this would protect her brain while Jill awaited rehab. Although her long-term memory was fine, she still struggled with recent events, often asking, quote, "Did someone hit me on the head with a shovel?" End quote. Doing some tests to prepare for rehab, the therapist was amazed when Jill walked a straight line. She was asked to count back from 100 by sevens, and she started to do this, but then absolutely refused to continue. Quote, "I hate math. I was an art student. I don't do math. That's why Michelle does the books," end quote, referring to their business. Asked to write a short sentence, Jill wrote a whole paragraph. Asked to draw a copy of a picture that she'd been shown, her picture was better than the original. And she really wanted to go shopping. Well, everybody was just joyous, including Dr. Rosowitz. Initially thinking that Jill might be of little help in building a case against Jeff, Detective Longo was now smiling. Joan and Fred were now living with the McDonalds, and the families would occasionally dine together. On May 5th, Tom McDonald shared a phone call he'd had with Jeff, who thanked him for taking care of the Russells. Then Jeff went on about how a few years ago he had warned Tom that Jill was unstable. Furious, Tom had thundered, quote, "Nothing could excuse what you did to Jill. You've destroyed so many people's lives," end quote, and hung up on it. So clearly Jeff is trying to justify his actions, which is simply impossible. And that day, Debbie wrote in her diary, quote, "Who knows what he's capable of?" End quote. Suspicions arose that the Cahills were violating the restraining order that prevented Jeff from seeing his kids, who were thoroughly traumatized by this whole thing. Tim mentioned going on hikes in the woods with his uncles, and the Russells had to wonder if they had run into Jeff, who had no risk of being seen with them out in the middle of the woods. Were they paranoid or rightly concerned? Either way, Joan and Fred wanted the kids to start counseling ASAP. Their therapist had warned that the kids visiting Jill in the hospital would be too traumatic. Once during a light conversation about decorating Jill's protective helmet, Tim blurted out that the fight had stemmed from his mother loving another very, very bad man. Well, this surprised Fred and Joan, who were worried what else were the Cahills telling the kids. They relayed this information to DA Fitzpatrick when they met with him, and Fitzpatrick assured them that he intended to make an example out of Jeff, that he would get no less than 20 years. Jill was struggling with day and night confusion and needed surgery for her fractured eye socket. But there was an upside, because on Mother's Day, she was reunited with her kids. But Tim became upset, believing that Jill was to blame for the fight that caused her injuries. A court hearing was scheduled for May 11th, and a psychological evaluation of Tim, Mary, and Jeff were ordered, with Jeff looking rough and unremorseful. Now Jill's attorney, Anthony DiCaprio, suggested that the Russells legally pursue temporary custody. Debbie spoke with social services, concerned about the kids, as the children's stories from that night contradicted Jeff's. She told them Mary vividly recalled the sounds her mother made while being viciously beaten, but she was assured that in the future, if Mary had to testify, it would be in the judge's chambers with only lawyers present. Well, even with ups and downs, Jill continued to improve, with her family and Tom Tulloch bringing her chocolate chip cookies and cake to help fatten her up, and she ate every bite. Jill loved chocolate. But she complained of painful headaches, symptoms of meningitis, while she was still struggling to recall what happened. Well, it was time, and her parents read her a newspaper article on the assault, and Jill took it surprisingly well. And Tom reassured her, "Jill, you are safe. Hospital security has a picture of Jeff, and it's posted at the nurses' stations as well." Well, when Joan and Fred visited the next day, Jill was angry and said, quote, "Do you believe what that son of a bitch did to me?" And then she said something that chilled him to the very bone. "He's going to finish me," end quote. And she echoed this fear to Debbie as well. Bits and pieces of Jill's memory of the beating were also beginning to resurface. She remembered Jeff swinging a bat at her from behind and trying to protect herself, with her arms breaking. After collapsing, he put his foot on her back to hold her down while dragging her through the woods. Well, the woods was probably the back patio, but she did live in a woodsy area. And Jill revealed some other things that Jeff had done. She thought it was weird when he came home with an adult-sized baseball bat when he was coaching 10-year-olds. And he claimed it was for any adults who might want to play. One time, Jeff had tried to lure her to the basement, but he was acting weird and suspicious. Jill had refused to go. During Christmas, he had hit her, causing her ear to bleed. But now Jill's main concern was the kids and what they had witnessed. But despite reassurances that the kids were fine, Jill's fears lingered. Days went by, and once again, Jill's head swelled up with fluid, causing intense pain. A painful spinal tap helped remove some of the pressure, and after trying a new medication, she broke out in hives and became disoriented, talking about being in the jungle with wild animals. Back in court, her parents and Anthony DiCaprio learned that while psychological evaluations had been conducted, the kids were still not in counseling. Jeff's attorney claimed that the kids had insurance. Jeff and Jill had canceled theirs to save money, and the Russells and the judge both went into shock. Jill had been hospitalized for a month with severe brain trauma without insurance. The judge ruled that Jeff was responsible for all medical and psychiatric bills, although Joan knew they would likely never see a penny. That night, Patty Cahill called and asked if she could take the kids to Cape Cod for the weekend, mentioning that Jeff would not be there. With Jill's eye socket surgery pending, it seemed like a good idea for the kids to have some fun while Fred and Joan were there supporting their daughter. Patty also requested no phone calls during this trip, which shocked Deb. Jill was still fighting for her life. What do you mean no phone calls? What if something happened? And as it turned out, Jill's condition worsened as an infection set in, and she was on IVs of antibiotics and fluids. And Joan and Fred were always by her side with Tom helping. When Jill finally woke up, she demanded a shower, and everyone decided that it was certainly time. She had her legs and her underarms shaved. She put on cheerful Barbie pajamas, with Debbie teasing her that she was brain trauma Barbie. But now Jill saw herself in the mirror. Half of her hair was gone, stitches everywhere, still purple and swollen. But the only thing she complained about were white hairs in her eyebrows. Oh, and she said she had seen Jeff slinking around. But given her recent hallucinations, no one took this seriously. In the weeks that followed, Jill fluctuated between hallucinations and being perfectly clear and conscious, punctuated by her quick wit, often amusing the staff who had grown to love her. However, by the end of May, she continued to decline. The persistent swelling of her brain led to painful spinal taps, and she was readmitted to ICU with a temperature of 102 degrees. She lost mobility in one arm and foot and was put on morphine. June 1998. Jill was fearful of another attack, convinced that Jeff was lurking nearby, with Debbie reassuring her she was safe. Tom thought she had some sort of short-term dementia, given all the brain trauma. She developed vision and balance issues. Going to have a shunt placed in her brain to reduce swelling, Jill gave her parents a thumbs up. Quote, but unknown to anyone, by that first week in June, when she was on another downward spiral, lethargic and in pain, Jill had every reason to be afraid. End quote. Back in May, when family court was determining what was best for his children, Jeff was searching online for lethal poisons. 8 days later, after a second hearing, he had zeroed in on cyanide, looking up information on how to prepare a fatal dose. As Jill struggled and Jeff researched cyanide, the grand jury began hearing evidence. By the end of June, DA Rick Trumfio informed Debbie that Jill's testimony was unnecessary due to the strong evidence. Jeff's claim of self-defense was disconnected from reality. The police investigation revealed that Jill was first struck when exiting the back door, after which Jeff dragged her back inside, supporting Jill's fragmented memories. On June 12, 1998, Jeff was indicted on multiple counts, including assault and use of a deadly weapon. In the arraignment, Jeff's attorney, Richard Priest, was present, as well as Jill's family. Listening to the charges, Judge William J. Burke remarked, quote, so he's walking the streets, end quote. Jeff pled not guilty, and a hearing was set for June 25th. Unfortunately, Jill continued to regress, losing the ability to speak. The shunt was draining too much fluid from her brain, and a new valve did not solve the problem, with a third installed. When Jill improved slightly and was transferred to rehab, the problems reoccurred. Dr. Rodzowick said, quote, some people just have a lot of trouble finding a system that works for them, and unfortunately, Ms. Cahill did. It took many, many operations before we were able to get her through the infections, end quote. And he's not kidding. Jill would go through 15 surgeries. But kindly Dr. Rodzowick sat down with Tim and Mary, explaining as much as a 7 and 10-year-old could comprehend. But even with these medical issues, seeing the kids always perked Jill up. And the kids were still not in counseling because Jeff hadn't deposited any money into the escrow account. Although he eventually got the court-ordered insurance, it didn't cover the kids' therapy. That would ultimately be funded by the Victims of Violence Crime Fund. And I had to wonder if Jeff feared what the kids might tell a counselor about the assault on their mother. Now, Debbie was just about fed up with the Cahills, who never inquired about Jill. When Mark Cahill called, wanting to take the kids to Cape Cod that July, Debbie explained that the visits depended on their counseling schedule. And she had to conclude that Mark was clueless because he seemed surprised that there would be more than one session, because the kids needed extensive therapy to cope with the trauma inflicted by Jeff. Finally, the children's court-ordered guardian, Jeff Monashevsky, arranged for them to see therapist Mary Kuhn, who approved the trip to the Cape. Joan dreaded the upcoming custody battle, knowing it would be vicious. She and Fred blamed Jeff for his behavior, not the entire Cahill family. While they were supporting Jill, They were thankful that the Cahills could care for Tim and Mary. However, the Cahills appeared to be chronically violating the court order by allowing Jeff to see the kids. Witnesses saw Jeff's Jeep parked outside the store where Patty had just brought the children. The kids told Mary Coon that, quote, God wanted their father to do what he did, and their mom deserved everything she got, end quote. And this is unforgivable. Children should never be dragged into adult conflicts, period. The Cahills appeared to have no sympathy for the Russell struggles either. Not long later, Mark Cahill sent Joan and Fred parking tickets he claimed that Jill had received in New York City, and these were later proven not to belong to her at all. What a horse's ass he is. June 30th, meningitis returned. Following her third surgery that week, Jill was back in ICU on a ventilator, and the next 48 hours were critical. But the new drain, it appeared to be working. But still, everybody was extremely worried because she was still in critical condition. July 12th, the family met with Dr. Rosowitz, who said the kids were needed now to support their mom's recovery because she was beginning to improve. Slightly, but improving. That weekend, the kids were with Joan and Fred at the McDonald guest house and were enjoying the pool. Debbie spotted Jim Cahill in the driveway, but he quickly pulled away. Curious, Tom McDonald called Jim, who said he wanted to, quote, take Tim to Pizza Hut, not the girl, just Tim, end quote. What the hell is that? What is that? Later, Kevin Cahill called and asked to take the kids to 9:30 a.m. Mass in the morning, but Counselor Mary Coon had warned that Uncle Kevin was sharing negative information and that the kids should never be alone with Uncle Kevin. Well, and that went over poorly. Mary's 8th birthday was celebrated on July 15th with family and friends surrounding her at the pool. They also had a small party in Jill's room, and singing Happy Birthday to Mary caused her heart monitor to peak. Aw. But sadly, none of the Cahills contacted Mary or sent a card. The following weekend, Uncle Kevin called and asked if he could bring the kids over to give Mary her present 4 days late, and he's not allowed to be alone with the kids. He tried to maneuver around the course requirements, but Joan would not let him be alone with them. And Kevin began yelling, with Joan hanging up. Then Jim Cahill drove over, demanding to know what was going on. And Jill took the opportunity to explain the seriousness of Jill's medical condition. And Fred just couldn't help himself, and he spat, quote, you never even sent Jill a damn card. I don't care if you hate her. She's your daughter-in-law, end quote. Mid-July, Jill's condition worsened due to the cerebral fluid buildup, leading to immediate surgery, as Tom Tulloch rushed to her side. While the medical team remained guardedly optimistic, the family was just anxious with worry. On July 21st, 3 months to the day after the brutal assault, Jill finally spoke, telling a nurse she loved her parents after weeks of silence. Tears of joy filled the family's eyes, even as she faced meningitis again. During this time, Joan left Jill twice, once in July for a mammogram, scheduled because 8 years earlier she had had breast cancer, and this one thankfully revealed a benign lump. And in September, Joan attended a wedding. Mary Coon updated Debbie on the kids' therapeutic progress. Tim was becoming more open about his mom's grave illness and the possibility of his dad being away for a long time. She described little Mary as, quote, Pollyanna on eggshells, end quote, seeking hugs and reassurance. The therapist had met with Jeff, who appeared detached and unable to understand why his kids struggled with the trauma of April 21st. It was just no big deal to him, which is unbelievable. Now Fred and Joan hired attorney Marilyn Miller to file a custody petition, while Jeff was still failing to pay the child support he owed them. Mid-August, after returning from Cape Cod, the Cahills filed a cross petition for custody. Relations deteriorated to dust when the Cahills took the kids back to their home, to the scene of the crime, to use the pool, which was simply unthinkable to Fred and Joan, and the Russells. They were done. To make matters worse, Joan went to pick up the kids from school and discovered that Patty Cahill had already gotten them. She was told that Patty had presented an affidavit signed by Jeff, granting her and Jim temporary custody, signed the night of his arrest. Furious, Joan returned with the current court order that awarded temporary custody to her and to Fred, and the principal took note of it. Now in court for the custody hearing, with the Cahills and Russells glaring at each other, attorney Marion Miller presented the Cahill violations of court rulings and restraining orders, along with Counselor Mary Croon's observations that the Cahills were speaking negatively about their mother to the children, to Judge Anthony Paris. Having a question about this, Judge Paris called Miss Coon, whose terse response led to the ruling. Custody was granted to the Russells. The Cahills could have their grandchildren every other weekend from Saturday at 9 a.m. to Sunday at 4 p.m., and then after school Wednesdays until 7 p.m. Uncle Kevin was prohibited contact, while Uncle Mark could only see the kids in the presence of Patty or Jim. Mary Coon also recommended that the children see their father for their sake. Jeff needed to explain to them that what happened in April was an adult matter and that he was sorry for his wrong actions. He must stress that it had nothing to do with them, and if he deviated from the script, the visit would end. After this ruling, Brian Cahill, Kevin's twin, who had been estranged from the family for 20 years, arrived to pick up the kids. To Joan and Fred, Brian expressed deep concern for Jill and was genuinely remorseful over the situation. And I think we all understand why Brian hadn't been seen at home for 2 decades. Now, with all these decisions made, Jeff's attorneys were delighted with the outcome. They were horrified there was going to be a custody battle and potentially a trial. You see, if the custody case had proceeded, Jeff would have had to testify about the events of April 21st, 1998, under oath, with his criminal trial approaching, something that the Cahills had overlooked in their rush to control the kids. So they lucked out on that one. And Jill was still recovering after her operation. Her speech wasn't perfect, but she joked about needing to shave her legs. Tom was affectionate and gentle with her, a helpmate devoted to the woman he loved. And on August 20th, she was moved from ICU, working with physical therapists and getting stronger while being infection-free. Jeff was now working, doing odd jobs for his brother Tim's father-in-law, and he was noticed out and about in town. The community was very divided. Those who knew the Cahills believed that Jill got what she deserved, while those who knew Jill thought that Jeff should be permanently locked up. While this debate raged on, Jeff was online researching potassium cyanide. After researching 68 websites, he became fairly knowledgeable about what was needed to concoct a fatal dose. He realized that he couldn't have potassium cyanide delivered to his home, so he planned to act as a middleman for a legitimate buyer. And his searches led him to General Super Plating, a company in nearby DeWitt, a Syracuse suburb, that used cyanide in its high-quality metal finishing processes. Jeff would test how easy it was to convince a UPS driver to hand over a package. On July 7th, he saw 34-year-old Robert Leo park behind Home Depot, which was right across from General Super Plating. Dressed in a dark pinstripe shirt, Jeff wore a maroon baseball cap with the General Super Plating logo and dark sunglasses. He approached the UPS van and asked, quote, "Do you have a next day air package for general superplating?" End quote. The driver, thinking Jeff was an employee, handed him a stack of packages to look through. Jeff quickly found the one with the California return address. And as he left, Leo called out, quote, "Wait, you need to sign for it." And Jeff replied, "Smith," as Leo typed the name into the computer, end quote. Chuckling, Jeff couldn't believe how easy it was. Now he needed a source for the toxin and found Bryant Labs in Berkeley, California, and he called asking about their purchasing procedures. Now, Jeff created a fake order, number 5076, using a crude reproduction of general superplating letterhead, and he even misspelled Berkeley twice. He ordered 1 pound, or half a kilogram, of potassium cyanide with a COD, cash on delivery payment. UPS would deliver it to General Superplating on July 10th, and the order was signed by Tracy Jones, Tracy spelled with an E. Bryant Labs forwarded the order to their supplier, Spectrum Labs, which shipped by July 9th. Jeff repeated this process several times to ensure that he would receive at least one package. Oh, God. Meanwhile, he was busy attending pretrial hearings on the assault charges against him. On July 10th, 13th, and 16th, Spectrum Labs received 3 orders from General Superplating, all dispatched by UPS. Each day, Jeff loitered near General Superplating, GSP, asking UPS driver Bob Leo if there were any packages for GSP. Well, there had been, but Leo had changed his route and they were already delivered. Going about his deliveries on another day, Leo saw the same dirty black Jeep Wrangler parked by the road and thought it might have broken down. Slowing down, he recognized Jeff in the baseball cap and sunglasses, who waved at him, but Leo ignored him. But Jeff kept at it, unaware that the UPS driver was growing suspicious. On July 17th, as Leo pulled into McDonald's, which was located catty-corner from GSP, he spotted Jeff standing there and shouted, quote, "I was already there. I made the delivery. Go over and talk with Cindy Breno," end quote, as Leo would later testify in court. That same day, Leo spoke with Kevin Keenan, a GSP truck driver, about the suspicious man in the baseball cap and glasses who kept impersonating GSP employees to steal packages. Leo gave Kevin all of the details about the man and his black Jeep Wrangler, which Kevin reported to the police. It was about lunchtime when Kevin Keenan arrived at the shipping dock and spotted the black Wrangler with the man Leo had described, and he couldn't believe it. He went inside to jot down the license plate, S187MT. While Keenan was inside, Jeff sneaked over and stole a package containing more than enough cyanide for his plans. While inside, Kevin Keenan spoke with Tracy Jones, spelling Tracy with no E. She was confused as she had received some strange packages of chemicals that she hadn't ordered. Checking invoices, they discovered that the items were from Spectrum Labs, and it was strange. They never ordered chemicals in such small quantities. Typically, when GSP ordered cyanide, it was in 2 or 3 1,600-pound or 765 kilogram containers. Tracy also saw that a third package had been logged into GSP shipping records, but this package of 3 500-milligram bottles of potassium cyanide were missing. When Tracy requested copies, Bryant faxed them over to her, and she saw immediately that they were fake. The logo was off, and her name was misspelled. Now she remembered back to July 17th, when Cindy Breno in the shipping department mentioned a man in a red baseball cap and glasses looking for UPS packages from California. He had been directed to the front desk, but he never showed up. Concerned about the situation, Tracy reported it to her boss and the company attorney, who advised her to contact DeWitt Police Department. DeWitt police officer Mark Roberts took statements from Tracy Jones, Kevin Keenan, and Cindy Breno, not taking the fake fax orders with him. Running a license plate of the black Wrangler, it was registered to Mark Cahill, who had no priors. Due to the lack of information sharing between city and state police, something that was fixed after 9/11, nothing unusual was flagged, and unbelievably, to Officer Robert, the name Cahill hadn't raised any red flags, despite the huge publicity about the violent assault on Jill Cahill by Jeff Cahill. Worse, that someone had put in effort multiple times into illegally acquiring enough deadly poison to kill a bunch of people, that did not blip either. Quote, "It was a mind-blowing oversight," end quote. No one reached out to Mark Cahill to ask why he was hounding UPS about packages containing cyanide. Officer Roberts, a 15-year veteran, did dispatch a description of the Jeep and the owner's name to local police districts, including Onondaga County, but received no responses. And Roberts just assumed that the witness must have misrecorded the license plate. August 18th. Jeff's lawyers now plan to plead self-defense and insanity while trying to suppress his confession and the forensic evidence. The judge rolled his eyes. District Attorney Rick Trumfio warned Debbie, Joan, and Fred that this case would be difficult. And by now, the Russells were struggling financially, receiving no child support from Jeff, and faced growing legal and medical bills, so they applied for Medicaid. And eager to help, Jill's friends organized a fundraiser to support the family. While Jeff was harassing UPS driver Leo, Jill drifted in and out of consciousness, her body and brain exhausted from a battle to regain awareness and recover. Sometimes she seemed to understand, but often she was in a twilight sleep with Joan by her side. Dr. Stephen Leduska from the coma unit now took over Jill's case, noting how much she had wasted away, no longer the vibrant and athletic woman she had been. As they aggressively pushed more nutrition into her beleaguered body, they used a coma stimulation program as well, and Jill began to show signs of improvement. Zany, Katie, Michelle, and Kathy visited Jill as often as they could. They all understood it would be a long road to recovery due to the damage to her brain. Jill had gone from being active a week after the assault and walking a straight line to being paralyzed on one side and deteriorating. Katie, who worked nearby, brought Jill lunch, but she often refused to eat. Drifting in and out, Jill would mention that Jeff had been there, while Katie reassured her that he had not. Reflecting now, Katie suspects that Jill was right all the time, that Jeff had slipped in at night to visit her. Early September, Jeff was fighting the prosecution, who wanted a blood sample so they could track Jill and Jeff's movements throughout his house that night. Now, this would confirm or disavow Jeff's story, potentially undermining the self-defense strategy of defense attorneys Richard Priest and Gary Miles, and the court ruled that Jeff had to comply and provide the blood sample. By October, Jill was waking intermittently, but was definitely conscious. She mentioned the names of Tim and Mary and answered yes or no questions, and sometimes asked her own. Nurse Julie Labagewski remembered the children's drawings in Jill's room. They always perked her up, and Julie was glad to see that Jill was washing her face and combing her hair independently. Due to construction at the hospital, Jill was moved to the second-floor rehab unit, and she had a great day when her dad pushed her in her wheelchair outside, where she saw the sunlight and the leaves changing color. During this time, Jill's progress was measured using a weekly coma recovery scale, which ranges from 0 to 25. In early May, Jill was a 5. By October, she was a 23, an incredible improvement, and every milestone was celebrated by the nurses and staff. And now Patty Cahill wanted to visit Jill for the first time. After consulting the counselor, Joan agreed it might be beneficial. Never getting a chance to tell Patty that her visit was approved, the next day Joan found her in the hospital holding her Bible, a rosary, and a cooler of yogurt, as Jill had just started eating pudding and Jell-O. And then Fred brought Patty in to see Jill, who made an effort to speak to her mother-in-law, and Joan was infuriated by the entire scene. She just didn't like Patty's attitude. Jill was aware of her surroundings, and Michelle visited her often. One night, Jill was agitated, trying to communicate something important that Michelle just didn't grasp. Zany also visited Jill and couldn't shake the feeling of wondering what Jill had been trying to communicate. Later, Michelle thought Jeff had been there. Nurse Julie also noted Jill becoming emotional, tearing up, and repeatedly mentioning her children's names as she tried to reconnect with them. But this was not unusual. Patients with brain trauma injuries can be very emotional, leading to frustration for everyone involved. On October 24th, Tom McDonald saw Mark Cahill at the soccer field with his convertible hood down, and in the back seat, unaccompanied by Patty or Jim, was an unseatbelted Mary, looking absolutely adorable. Exasperated, Tom knew the court orders were just being ignored. And this happened right before the big fundraiser was held to support the Russell family, with local merchants from Skaneateles and Auburn supporting the effort. The event featured activities such as live country and Western music, face painting, bake sales, a chili cooking contest, and a silent auction, which would raise nearly $66,000. That day, a TV camera crew knocked at Jeff's door and stuck a microphone in his face and asked what he thought about the family having a fundraiser to raise money to support his kids. Jeff shut the door, feeling mortified when his reaction aired on public TV. That Monday, Kathy and Michelle began distributing all of the auction items, while the Cahills continued to violate the restraining order. Tuesday, October 27, 1998. After finishing her post-auction tasks, Michelle noticed Jeff driving by in the black Wrangler around 4 p.m. and just kind of wondered where he was going. She was heading into an aerobics class, which he hadn't attended since before the assault. Joan, Fred, and Debbie took Tim and Mary to visit Jill, and Debbie noticed Jeff's mugshot at the nurse's station outside Jill's room, but thankfully the kids didn't seem to notice it. Jill's brother Dave had flown in from Key West for the fundraiser, which lifted everyone's spirits. Jill was slowly regaining her faculties, and she was determined to be there for her kids. On the other hand, Jeff Cahill faced a bleak future as his life rested in the hands of a jury. He would need them to believe his version of that night in April when he had nearly killed his wife. Had he succeeded, he believed his self-defense argument would have been so much stronger. She was unfaithful, a neglectful mother, and many would sympathize with him, and he might have received a light sentence, possibly justifiable manslaughter for a domestic dispute gone horribly wrong. But that wasn't his situation. Jill was alive and regaining her speech, and she looked terrible, skin and bones and disfigured. If she appeared in court, Jeff knew he was done. And that TV camera in his face exposing him as a deadbeat dad and wife beater who didn't support his kids hadn't helped. He made up his mind. Clinical technician Tyrone Hunter was on the second-floor rehab unit at the State University of New York Health Science Center in Syracuse on the night of October 27, 1998. While wheeling a patient back from radiology, he noticed a white male housekeeper, 35, 40 years old, 5'8", wearing light chinos, a blue striped polo shirt, and Timberland boots. But something was off. The housekeeping staff wore dark blue Dickies work pants and shirts with the hospital logo. That guy didn't match. Plus, his mop wasn't hospital issued, and his ID was missing a name and a photo. When Tyrone was noticed staring, the man went off mopping in another direction. But Tyrone felt a bad feeling in his gut. Oh God, trust your gut, Tyrone. Just before 10 p.m., LPN Vicki Dunning was at the nurse's station dispensing medication for her patients. She greeted a man with a mop passing by, noticed that he seemed odd. His sandy hair didn't seem to fit on his head. He headed towards the coma unit at the end of the floor as Vicki continued her task. Suddenly, Tyrone appeared, trusting his gut. He had seen this guy in pants and the blue shirt with the broom. Quote, "I have a gut feeling. I don't think he belongs here." End quote. Vicki gestured for them to split up, one going left, one going right, but the man had vanished. Doubling back, they decided to check Jill Cahill's room, 2206. Just earlier, both cleaner John George and nurse Marie Morley noticed an unusual man with a mop near the nurse's station. Cynthia Jones saw him too, and she needed help with a spill, signaling for assistance, but he'd walked past her, heading towards room 2206. Feeling uneasy about this, Cynthia went to speak to her supervisor. By now, Vicki had alerted security and found Julie Labliewski, the registered nurse in charge. After hearing about a suspicious man, Julie checked that the emergency room door was locked and joined Vicki in Jill Cahill's room, where Jill had been put to bed, resting peacefully a short time before. Turning on the light, Julie saw Jill's face was blue, eyes wide awake. Something was terribly wrong. Quote, "I could see she was not breathing normally. She was taking very deep breaths, gasping for air. I wasn't even thinking that something happened to her then. I called for extra help." End quote. It happened quickly. Jill went from gasping for breath to not breathing at all, and Tyrone noticed the panic on her face along with the strong odor of bitter almonds. Julie laid Jill down to check her vitals, but found none. Shining a light into her eyes revealed no reaction, and she spotted a white substance on Jill's gown and small lumps on her chest. My God, she's been given something. Julie quickly moved everyone out of the room and wheeled Jill into the corridor. As they rushed into the staff dining room, Jill flatlined. Code blue. CPR was initiated and the crash team arrived, consisting of a duty nurse supervisor, an anesthesiologist, a respiratory therapist, and house doctor. The patient regained a faint pulse, prompting the team to move Jill to the ER, where they worked feverishly to resuscitate her. She had fought so hard over the last 6 months, facing numerous scares and setbacks, determined to improve for the sake of her kids. But now she was on life support. Jill's 38-year-old Ivy League-educated husband, who had viciously assaulted her, was the prime suspect. Relevant fact: about 50% of people can detect the bitter almond smell of potassium cyanide. Weeks earlier, Jeff had hid a container of cyanide next to his backyard shed. He found a small plastic glitter container, the kind that kids have, and dumped out the sparkles, filling it with the deadly poison before he re-hid the rest. At 8:30 p.m., he arrived, ready to slip into the hospital unnoticed. Clipping on a plastic ID card with no photo, he put on a reddish-brown wig, and he barely recognized himself. Around 9 p.m., he got into his Jeep, noting the sunglasses in the glove box, and drove slowly. He was no Ted Bundy, about to get pulled over for a traffic violation. The university hospital parking lot had few visitor cars, but he parked away from the main entrance, checking to ensure that none of his hair was visible. And he slid his hand into his pocket. The little bottle was still there. He had managed to get into the hospital before without signing in, but was aware that some stickler for the rules might check his ID and raise an alarm, putting him in trouble. But he also understood that hospitals are busy and dynamic environments, so there was always likely to be some distraction. Now, as he approached the desk where security officer Justin Hamlin sat, just 2 months into his new job, when asked for an ID, Jeff flashed the tag with the hospital logo and was waved through. However, there was something about Jeff's eyes that caught Justin Hamlin's attention. They seemed very hollow and distant. Inside, Jeff made his way to the basement where the janitorial supplies were kept. This wasn't his first time doing this. He knew that the night porters were already out on their rounds, which gave him the opportunity. He grabbed a mop, covered it with a dust cover, and headed up the fire stairs to the second floor, unnoticed thanks to his earlier reconnaissance. He headed into the rehabilitation unit, running into a few employees: Tyrone Hunter, Vicki Dunning, John George, Cynthia Jones, and Marie Morley. Approaching the coma unit, Jeff noticed that Jill's name was missing from the door, a security precaution, and he knew where to go since he had visited her earlier. Making sure no one was watching, he entered room 2206 where Jill lay asleep. He took out the bottle, sat down on the bed, and popped the cap. As he reached for her mouth, her eyes flew open, panic spreading across her face. It was Jeff. Clamping her lips tightly, Jill fought him as he tried to wrench them apart, turning her head from side to side. His nails dug into her lips, scratching them until a small gap appeared, and he quickly forced the deadly poison into her mouth, spilling some on her neck and chest. And then he slipped away, dashing down the stairs and out into the night, confident that his troubles would soon be behind him. Before he was outside, Jill was gasping for air. Julie Lebayuski was performing CPR. The code blue called. Detective Dennis Murphy from the Syracuse Police Department was working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift and had already heard about the incident at the hospital. He was instructed to partner with Detective Mike Dillon to go to Jeff Cahill's residence and bring him in for questioning. Backup would be provided by the Sheriff's Department, an officer from Skaneateles, and Lieutenant Tom Bosford. 12:15 a.m. The cool, crisp autumn air surrounded the officers as they arrived at Jeff's dark house, where a black Jeep was parked in the driveway. Uncertain if Cahill was armed, Detective Mike Dillon knocked on the door. Jeff came downstairs wearing pajamas, and Dillon explained that they were investigating a crime, and Jeff had to go with them. He got dressed and was handcuffed and placed in the unmarked Chevy Lumina. Officer Botsworth noted to the others, quote, "His car is still warm," end quote. They always forget about that, don't they? En route to the police station, Detective Dennis Murphy noticed that Jeff had fallen asleep. At 3:45 a.m., Jeff was read his Miranda rights and charged with attempted murder and aggravated criminal contempt. City Court Judge Timothy Higgins sent his bail at $1 million or a bond of $2 million. And this time, no family came to his aid, and Jeff kept his mouth shut, emotionless. If Jill Cahill died, District Attorney Fitzpatrick vowed to seek the death penalty. And that wraps up a very difficult part 2 on While She Slept by Marion Collins. In part 3, Perennial Bloom, Jill Cahill is on life support, fighting for her life. There will be devastating struggles ahead while investigators gather evidence for the trial of Jeff Cahill that will change New York's laws forever. But I told you, there is nothing predictable in this story, so hang on. It is going to be a heck of a ride, and part 3 will be out shortly. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate you joining me on this journey through some of the best true crime books and cases that matter so much. If you enjoy the podcast, leave a 5-star review and share it with friends and family. Play it at work. Let people hear about it. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss my next True Crime Book Club trilogy, The Caretaker's Game by Charles Wallace. This is not about homicides or serial killers, but it still explores a frightening and devastating crime committed against some of the most vulnerable members of our society, the elderly, especially those suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's-like illnesses. When adult children, often living a goodly distance away from their parent, discover that the parent needs assistance, finding a reliable caregiver is crucial, allowing some semblance of peace of mind, knowing that their loved one is in good hands. Charles Wallace's mother, Joelle Fleming, her caretaker, smiled, saw to everything, and quietly seized control of Joelle Fleming's life and legacy. Charles Wallace and his siblings were completely unaware that anything was wrong until it was too late. Over the course of 3 years, more than $1 million vanished from their fiercely independent mother's accounts after she placed her trust in her caregiver. This shocking revelation sent Charles on a quest to uncover the truth about what happened to his mother. This is not a tale of woe, but you will empathize with Charles as he sifts through emails, accounts, finding passwords, checking out the professionals involved, and trying to hold them to account in search of answers. And it serves as a cautionary tale that everyone with an aging parent should heed. I know I did. The Caregiver's Game is part forensic investigation, part family memoir, and a practical warning for families with elderly parents. A special thank you to my Murder Shelf Book Club Patreon group for helping me to choose this somewhat unusual true crime book, which is essential for protecting a vulnerable segment of our society. So we got a lot going on this month. We got Crimecon Las Vegas the end of May. If you still need a ticket, use my code, murdershelf, all lowercase letters, one word, and save 10%. Please come by Creators Row and see me. And don't forget, our Crimecon meetup is Thursday, May 28th, after the Crimecon kickoff party in the lobby bar, the big one by the reception desk. So think 10 p.m. local time. I can't wait to see you. So lobby bar, 10 o'clock, May 28th, after the kickoff party. Always trust your gut. I see you as you hear me. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.